We are back with the Datsun build. Today we're in for a special episode because this is going to be our first test fit of the VQ35HR along with all of the Apex engineered subframes and everything that came in. So I am excited for this. Let's just get right to it. We're going to be installing this engine in there for the first time. It's going to be in its home. So for those of you that have been following for a long time, I used to have a Datsun of my own that I was going to build, and I've been collecting parts for that Datsun for a while. One of those parts being this VQ35HR. Now this actually came out of a G35XS, which was an all-wheel drive platform, but we're going to be putting it in here as a rear-wheel drive car. So we've got the transmission also, a 6-speed manual. We've got this engine. It's already been converted to rear-wheel drive now. And we did a lot of other things on it. Now there are many ways to get this VQ35HR engine into the Datsun. We could just use all the stock stuff and just make some custom mounts and make it work. But the whole thing is, this car obviously has been repainted. My buddy wants to be able to enjoy it, have a lot of adjustability. So I looked at what we can do as far as upgrading the suspension. Now there's quite a few options out there. The one that we landed on was Apex engineered, mainly because they pretty much had a plug-and-play solution for all the front suspension, all the rear suspension, the VQ swap, as well as the 6-speed manual that's going in here, and upgrading the whole differential. So the whole powertrain is getting upgraded, right? The drivetrain, everything, the diff, the transmission, the engine, all the suspension, coilovers, all of it is getting on here, and all of their solutions are plug and play. I'm going to be showing you guys how to install all this stuff. That way you can see for yourself if this is something that you want to take on for your Datsun. Hopefully everything goes together pretty easily. You know, a lot of times when things are plug and play, they're not always plug and play. So we're going to find out, we're going to see how all this stuff fits in here. And today is going to be our first test fit. So let's get right to it. So I've already got all of the front Apex engineered stuff separated. I don't have the coilovers over here, but I've got everything else, the subframes and whatnot. Now, when you're actually ordering the Apex engineered subframe for the front, it asks you what kind of swap you're doing, whether it's a LS, whether it's a VQ, or something entirely different. They've got a bunch of different variations. Now, one of the big things about the VQ swap that's different than the rest is the adjustability of the subframes. So we technically have two subframes. One is for the steering rack and the rest of the suspension, the tension arms and all of that. And this one's actually for the engine mount itself. And the main reason that is because the oil pan on the VQ is very different than some of the other swaps that most people do in here. This should be straightforward, right? Because we're gonna have one whole subframe with all the suspension attached to it. Whenever we need to pull the engine or anything like that out, we're gonna have to take it out from the top because this bar is actually gonna sit inside the engine bay on top of the frame rails. So there's gonna be a lot of adjustability here. We're gonna see exactly what we can do as far as the engine and transmission placement. So we've also got the transmission cross member for the CD transmission. The transmission that we're using on the HR, you can't just use a normal CD 009 that you would find on the early model 350Zs that everybody wants. So it's the later version of it. So it's still very similar, but the mounts and everything should line up perfectly. The main difference is how the throwout bearing operates and where all of the hydraulics are. So we've got all of that stuff ready to go. We do need to put a lot of this stuff together. So it's kind of like Legos for adults, and that's what we're gonna be doing. And the best thing is, since there is so much adjustability, we can really dial in the suspension once we've got everything else added in. Now, one thing that I do like with the whole Apex engineered kit is how they have all the hardware laid out. It's actually labeled, and it's kind of shrink wrapped to the labeled areas. So it tells you exactly what type of hardware it is and where it goes, right? So this one is for the cross member tension brace. We've got the carriage bolts. It tells you the thread count, the thread pitch, all of that stuff. That way, if you ever have to order replacements, you can. And since we're only going to be test fitting this, we're actually not going to install everything fully. One thing that not too fond of is the nylon lock nuts. And the main reason is because you can't just keep tightening and loosening and reuse them. So this is why we're just gonna put everything, test fit it, just hand tighten it as much as we can for the time being. Some of these things also have lock washers, so that works out really well. And we've got some bushings that are specialized to the Apex engineered kit. But one thing that I would do, which I am gonna do, is I'm gonna make sure I take pictures of all of the listing of all the hardware. And we're gonna start with the front subframe, not the one that's meant for the engine itself. That engine secondary subframe is actually gonna come in from the top and sit on top of the frame rails. So that's why we're gonna have to put the engine in from the top as well. So right now we're just gonna put the front main subframe and start putting some of the suspension on. We're not gonna put the coilovers on just yet either. The main thing I wanna do today is make sure we have all the components that we need and test fit the engine. That way I can see exactly where, how much clearance we have, where's the transmission going to sit. Some of the stuff is just not going to be fully tightened because we still are going to take everything back off. I want to clean up some of these areas, paint some of this stuff as well, that way it's future proofed. So in the meantime, we're going to see whatever hardware we can reuse from the stock stuff, we'll do that, and then whatever's not reusable, we're just going to use the new hardware. Well, that was pretty easy. Hopefully the rest of the stuff goes just as smooth. This is the whole reason why we went the Apex engineered kit. That way we're not spending all that time creating custom subframes and all this stuff if someone else has already got it figured out, right? So let's not reinvent the wheel, and I really like the solution so far because it's been pretty easy. All this only one thing. All right, so here are the engine mount arms. These two go on the engine itself. These two are gonna go on that secondary subframe. We've got this bolt right here, it's gonna go through, and then a nut from the other side of the subframe on both sides. Now on these, they did not include bolts to go to the actual engine itself. If you have a rear wheel drive VQ35 that you're using, you should be able to reuse the factory bolts. You're just gonna need a spacer because this plate is thinner than the actual factory mounting arms. So you're going to use some washers and a lock washer as well to make sure you space it out. And then as far as the bolts that go in here, those are included that go like this. And then the bolt goes all the way through. I believe these are both the same size, so left and right shouldn't matter. Oh no, one is smaller than the other. And they're not labeled left or right, so let's figure that out. 7 centimeters to the bottom of that. They're both the same, 7. So how can they even do that? How would they be different sizes? Unless the curve on that is different, the subframe itself. Oh, it is. Right? That side's lower than that side? Or is it just my mind playing tricks? So there's no instructions on which one goes where. I'm going to assume the short one goes on the driver's side because the steering rack, the steering column is going to go all the way through. So we're going to put the shorter one there. Which one's shorter? This one. And then I don't have, the bolts that I have are too big, so I'm going to order shorter ones, but for right now I'm just going to put some washers so we can get it on there. And I took off the header mainly because I don't want that back section hitting the firewall. I'm not sure if the headers are going to fit just yet. And since it's the first test fit, don't want to make it too difficult. Already. So I had to swap out the bolt because the nuts that were provided in the actual cross member little packet, they were the wrong nuts for the thread pitch of the bolt that they provided. So I'm just putting one of my own bolts and nuts in there for right now, and I'll reach out to them, see what they say. And I mean, there's a lot of bolts and nuts, right? There's a bunch of other cross member packets as well. So maybe just one was in the other section, but for now, this is what we're gonna do. It's just a test fit. Now, when the engine actually comes in, the mounts are going to slide into this section. So we should be able to move this around to get it adjusted. It won't work that way because this oil pan is actually hitting this bar. Now I followed the pictures that Apex had on their website, and that's how the bar was oriented. Unless it needs to be flipped, so that this section right here, this whole tube, is on the back, which would make a little bit more sense. Or the longer arm goes here. Because remember we put the shorter one on this side because of the steering column? I don't know why I didn't think about this, but I put the straps around the engine mount arms to lift it up. So in order for me to swap those out, I got to put it back on the engine stand. I need a microfiber. So the engine is kind of hanging a little bit low, this oil pan right here. I mean, we're not going to slam it to the ground, but if we were, we definitely don't want the oil pan to be the first thing that hits. So we could definitely make like some kind of skid plate or whatever. But what I'm seeing right now is definitely the engine is sitting a little lopsided. So this side, the driver's side, needs to go up a little bit more. So now this could be because this engine mount arm, the longer one, we put on the passenger side. But there's so much adjustability. We can move it around. We can still move it forward and backwards. Moving it forward, we've got probably about 1 inch. Moving it back, probably got about 1 inch. So right around there. But I think we've got it in the right spot. We just need to adjust it. I don't want to really adjust it too much yet because it's still going to go back once we have the transmission hooked up. Now, what I'm seeing though is those bell housing bolts are right close to that firewall. So the bell housing for the CD transmissions is pretty wide. That might be a concern, but we'll find out once we actually put the transmission up. And I already went ahead and messaged Apex Engineered to see if they have any like specific measurements of where this bar needs to sit for the engine mount arms, and if there's any orientation specific or anything like that. So we'll see what they respond for that. But right now I just wanted to get this up here and see what the accessibility for everything else is. Now the headers, they're definitely not gonna work because the headers are gonna run right into the firewall. So we're just gonna have to chop them up or get different headers and then have them dump right here. So now that we don't have any bushings for the Apex Engineered stuff, there's no bushings for these tension arms, it's just straight metal. So we won't have to worry about the bushings melting or anything like that, and we can just heat wrap everything. So we've got the engine in there for the time being with both subframes on there. I'm not installing any of the rest of the suspension yet, but what I am gonna do is I'm gonna install the rear subframe and test fit that. The differential is actually on its way. We're gonna be using the Ford Super 8.8 rear differential out of the newer Mustangs. So I believe it's from 2018 to 2023 Mustangs. So we're going to be putting that differential in here, which is probably going to require some modifications. But first, I just want to make sure I'm testing the subframe, seeing what all I need to notch in here. Since this is a 240Z, there is going to be some notching that's going to be required to fit the diff, to fit the actual subframe itself. Mainly because the early model S30 chassis, which is this 240Z, they have a spare wheel well. And the later ones, the spare wheel well is there, but it's moved further back towards the back of the car. So we're going to have to see exactly what we need to notch and go from there. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and pull this gas tank down. You don't necessarily have to take the gas tank down in order to put the subframe on, but since we're going to be upgrading the internals of the gas tank, I also want to see what it looks like inside. We're going to need to put a different fuel pump. All of that's going to have to be changed out. So we're going to go ahead and drop that gas tank. Now Selena is sick, so I'm just going to be filming this on the tripod in a time-lapse mode. But like you see, I mean, most of this stuff is already taken out. We're just going to take off some more fasteners and drop the gas tank. Before we can even test fit the rear subframe, we do need to install these bushings to the mounting areas. Now this is also referred to as the mustache bar for some reason, and the bushings are included with the Apex engineered rear subframe. These bushings I believe are made by Energy Suspension. They're polyurethane bushings, but just like any other poly bushing, it usually comes in two halves, and then you have a sleeve that goes down the middle to kind of connect everything, and that's what the bolt goes through. But the biggest thing with any kind of poly bushing, it's a very, very tight fit, so you do want to lube it up. The lube also helps just with squeaks and stuff like that that you might get later on. So be generous with the lube, and it's going to make this whole process a lot easier. Now, as far as putting the center sleeve in between the two halves, you are going to have to whack that in. You can definitely use some kind of a press if you have. Even some vice grips might help if they open up wide enough. But this was pretty straightforward. Just lubed it up enough, and then just whacked it in with the mallet. Now obviously I don't have the differential in this subframe. We are just trying to mock it up so we can figure out where we need to notch this early S30 chassis. So like I said before, this is a 240Z, and Apex Engineered does tell you that you need to notch the spare wheel well in order for that subframe to fit. And then depending on the differential you go with, you might also have to notch other areas. So for the time being, I'm just going to notch the spare wheel well. We're going to button all this stuff up later on. So right now I'm just going to cut carefully and just get out as much as we need to. Cutting out the areas on the body, it's much easier to use a body saw because you can actually get pretty precise with it, or even a cut-off wheel will help. In order for the subframe to fit, all that really was required was just that notch on the spare wheel well, but you can't actually bolt the front sections fully in with those bushings because there is a bar that's going across. Now that bar is there mainly to just keep all of that subframe in line until you put the differential on. Once the differential is mounted in, then you can remove that bar that's there temporarily. So I picked up this Ford Super 8.8, which is found in the 2015 plus Mustangs and even in the F-150s. But this came out of a Mustang. The F-150 is the solid axle. This is the independent rear. So this differential is going to fit right in with this Apex engineered rear subframe. And then we've got the drive shaft as well. We're going to get the two drive shafts mated once we have the right measurement for the transmission, the 6-speed manual, that section, and then the section that goes into the differential. Now, Apex Engineered also provides the actual axle shaft that we're going to be using. We just have to take the ends off. So the end that's going towards the diff is going to come off from the diff side. the end that's going onto the actual wheel hub, which is from a 370Z, because we're using the 370 wheel hubs, the 370Z brakes, and all of that. So that end's gonna come from there, and then we have the right size axle shaft from Apex Engineered already. So the only thing that we're really gonna have to customize here is just the drive shaft itself, which you would have to do that anyways because the length is gonna be different. This had low miles, like less than 50,000 miles, already drained the fluid out. It was actually pretty dirty, but no big shavings or anything like that. So all we really need to do right now is get it out of here because we don't need anything else besides the half shafts and the diff itself. So the way I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna remove all of this section first. That way the actual half shaft can slide out, because into the diff, it actually pops into the diff with the C-clip, and then there's a nut that goes on the wheel hub side. So we'll take the nut off, we'll take the whole actual spindle assembly off, and that should give us enough space to pull the whole half shaft out. Well, the perks of not being in the Northeast, or anywhere up in the North, or in Canada, no rust. All the rust that's on here is just surface rust from the rear end sitting outside, but I can just push the actual axle out from the hub. Mostly from all the Loctite. Oof. That one was hot. All right. With all the axles and everything off, now we can actually remove the diff, which is held in with 4 bolts. 2 in the front, 2 in the back. Now this is something that the Germans still don't have figured out for some reason, especially BMWs, for example. Most of the new BMWs, even the M chassis cars, X3M, F80, all the M cars really, they don't have 2 diff mounting points on one, either the front or the back, which always ends up causing problems. Or the diff mount itself, there's always issues, and possibly because the way that people drive as well. But a lot of the American cars, like the Mustangs, the Corvettes, they've got it figured out for the most part. They add more mounting sections, they add a little bit more bushings, because they know that people are gonna be just doing burnouts. So hopefully BMW gets that sorted moving forward. All right, so we've got the diff on the actual transmission jack. We're gonna lift it up, see if we could test fit it in here. Now, I haven't removed the bar that comes on the Apex Engineered subframe in the front. It's to hold the actual tubes a little bit further apart in the right orientation. You're not supposed to remove that until you get the diff installed, because the diff is actually like solid mounted right to the subframe. There's no bushings that go into the diff. The bushings are all on the actual, they call this the mustache bar. So there's bushings on this end and there's bushings in the front. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to test fit this. Now, usually if you look at all the Apex engineered videos, they've got a whole series on their channel on how to put all this stuff together. On their videos, they're doing all of this stuff kind of outside the car, right? So I just wanna see how it's gonna be like trying to test fit this with the subframe installed in the car. And we are probably gonna have to cut some of this frame rail right here. Might not be considered a frame rail, but we might have to cut some of this right here, at least notch it or section it out. So that's why I'm trying to do it with the subframe installed, so I can get a better idea of exactly what needs to be cut. We don't want to cut too much of this. We'll cut as much as we need to, and then we'll box it in later. But right now, this is all test fitting stages. Let's see where we're at. Now, I said this before, I've never installed a VQ35HR into a Datsun. I've never installed a Ford 8.8 into a Datsun. So this is all new to me. We're figuring it out together, and we're gonna see how this works out. Good thing for us is we do have Apex engineered. We can reach out to them if we're running into any problems. Everything has been self-explanatory for the most part. Yeah, I didn't think this through. It's narrower at the bottom than it is at the top. So the mounting ears go from the top, and they're wider. So we might have to tilt it. That might work, we'll see. It's not gonna happen. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the subframe down, put it on the diff, since it is solid mounted, we don't have to worry about messing up any bushings or whatnot. And then we'll put the whole subframe with the diff assembly into the car, see where it's interfering with the chassis, and then we can figure out where we need to cut. So first, we gotta take the subframe back off. I love this hammered black finish. Hopefully we don't damage it too much. Almost all of the Apex engineered components we've got have had all this hammered black finish. So I don't know how to replicate that, but that might be something that we're gonna have to do at the end of this project. But in the meantime, so I've got this just chilling right here. Then we're gonna have to figure out a way to lift it back up. I think once the diff is mounted to the subframe, then it shouldn't be a problem because there's no bushings to worry about. We should be able to just lift this whole subframe up, put it on the transmission jack, and then lift it up onto the car. Hitting that switch. I've notched this whole area right there all the way. Move these lines, move all of these lines this way, and then we should be good. Which I think we're going to have to redo some of these lines anyways for new fuel lines, change the brake lines as well to make sure everything works as it should. And just like that, we've got the rear end in. This is crazy. I mean, everything really just bolts up right to where it needs to go. There's a couple of things that we're gonna set up to notch. There's some clearance things here and there, which is to be expected because this is a pretty massive diff compared to the stock one. And this is a little bit overkill for the VQ35HR, but you never know what's to come in the future. Now with that being said, the only real thing that's left to test fit still is the actual transmission itself. And once we have that transmission in there, then we can actually get the drive shaft measurements, start getting that made. But that's it for this video. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.